So how do we deal with controlling people? Find out on this episode of IncreMental Health Tips. Welcome to IncreMental Health Tips. My name is Jared, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Liz. Over the past few weeks, we've done a series on how to manage relationships with difficult people, whether it's in a work sort of relationship or a personal sort of relationship. And today we're going to be dealing with the topic of controlling people. So that's somebody who really wants to micromanage and control all of your actions. So maybe the place to begin, Liz, is where do you think this whole need for control comes from in people?
So for some people, they just like to have a sense of power over others, but I think most of the time, controlling behavior ends up coming out of some sort of insecurity. Someone might be afraid that things aren't going to be done to their standard, and so they end up trying to control another person instead of just delegating it and trusting that the person's going to do it.
Or it could really come from not just the insecurity, but past experience where maybe they trusted somebody in some capacity and were burned. So it's a really prevalent problem. I mean, there isn't in graduate school, as we're discussing kind of some of the pitfalls of organizational culture and some of the psychology behind that. We talked a lot about this, and really a lot of it boils down to understanding expectations, both your expectations of other people and also other people's expectations of you. But that's saying that is one thing, doing that is another. Is there any practical advice or tips you can give to people to maybe diagnose what the issue may be with the person that they feel is controlling and how to maybe address it?
Well, I think trying to look at when the controlling behavior started, what is the controlling behavior trying to accomplish? So if you look at a couple, maybe one of them's usually the one that cares for the children, and then they ask the other parent to make the kids' lunches. And then when it's time for the kids to go, the lunches aren't made. And so then it's a scramble to get the kids' lunches ready in 30 seconds so they can get on the bus for school. So in a situation like that, there can be an insecurity that develops. Lunch didn't get made last time, so now the parent who's usually responsible is concerned, if I try to delegate this, are they going to do it? And then they start asking, did you do it? Did you do it? Did you do it? And the other person feels harassed because they're constantly being asked to do something that they know they're capable of doing. And that really comes out of a place of anxiety that it wasn't done last time, so now I've got to make sure this other person's going to do it if I'm not able to do it myself.
Well, and even more practically, there are people out there who, if given the choice, they would much rather do everything by themselves without anybody else. But the world doesn't work that way, unfortunately, and so sometimes sometimes they need to learn how to let it go. So there's another aspect to this that I think we should touch on, which is boundaries. So it's one thing, okay, the example you gave of parents getting their children or child ready for school, they obviously have a mutual stake in that. But there are situations where the other person has no stake, or maybe a concern or an interest, but no, like, it's not really their business, if that makes sense. So that would be like in the example of a workplace, that would be somebody from another department coming to you and telling you how to do an aspect of your job. Or in a personal relationship, if there are two people in a dating relationship, if one is concerned about some characteristic or action or behavior of the other person. Oh, I don't want you to go to the movies on Friday. They may have a vested interest in how that person spends their time, but at the same time it's not directly connected to them, if that makes sense. So how do we establish boundaries properly with people who maybe have no business being in the situation to begin with?
Well, I do think it can depend a bit on context. If it's someone who's from a different department, then you're talking about someone who actually doesn't have any seniority over you. So reminding them to go through the correct channels, like, oh, if you have that concern, why don't you address it to my boss or something like that, so that you're keeping those workplace boundaries the way that they're actually supposed to operate in the workplace and maintaining proper department structure. Whereas if it's someone like a friend trying to pressure you into, I want to do this specific activity, or it could be, two women at the park talking about parenting and one insisting that they know the right way to do it, whereas different families do things in different ways. It could just be as simple as, I'm glad that works for you.
Yeah, and I think, well, there's two aspects to this, and one I think is more straightforward than the other. The first is, I think a lot of when people are being controlling, I think comes out of a place of trying to be helpful. And so if it turns out you are the one who tends to be thought of as controlling, you can always figure out words or phrases to sort of preface what you're saying with, in the past I've had success taking this approach. It might be something you could consider. So prefacing things that way, I think, might actually help with the disconnect between what your intentions are and how people perceive your intentions. The other aspect to this is ultimately trust. And I mean, trust isn't an easy thing to do, but what do you think, Liz? Does this ultimately boil down to, if somebody is controlling, they need to develop a better sense of trust? Or is that relationship of trust both ways? Or what do you think?
So I think a lot of times this controlling behavior can result from broken trust. So if you think of in a relationship where one of the partners cheated, then the partner who was cheated on might start checking the phone to see, are they sticking to what we agreed to, or are they cheating on me again? So if there has been that sort of violation of trust, then that trust needs to be rebuilt, and it needs to be, some substantial steps need to be taken in order to rebuild that trust, to really examine what caused this violation of trust and how can we rebuild it successfully so that, there doesn't need to be controlling behavior in order for the trust to be sustained.
Well, and obviously this is a process. I know that in one of my places of employment, my boss has had other people prior to my coming, other people in my same position who have had various levels of ability and skills. And so it took, I don't know, 8 to 10 months before my boss would actually, trust may be a strong word, but before he would actually know that when he gave me a certain amount of responsibility that's doesn't go through him, that it's getting done to his satisfaction. And that's just because other people who have worked in my same position didn't have the same aptitudes or abilities, but in the same sense, there's probably areas of deficit that I have. And so a little self-awareness about maybe somebody's past experience, because it doesn't always, when you mention broken trust, that broken trust doesn't have to necessarily be with you. And so understanding that this person may be bringing some baggage to the situation is an important consideration.
Yeah, and we all have our past experiences. And another point is that it can be really important to try to learn what you can from someone who has controlling behavior. So sometimes people have controlling behavior because there's a specific way of doing things that they've found works really well. So if you work in a very specialized field, sometimes that controlling behavior can actually be a way of teaching new skills. So, in my profession, we have some quality control standards. I have to have supervision for a certain number of hours to ensure that I'm doing proper work. And that can feel like it's a controlling oversight, getting into all the little details of what I did, what I said to a client. But really, that isn't designed to feel controlling. It's designed to make sure that I'm providing high quality work. And there's a lot that I can learn from just trying to listen to what my supervisor is trying to teach me at that time, instead of focusing on, oh, I feel controlled by this because they want to look at every little detail of everything I'm doing.
Well, and just to add, even if the person who you feel is controlling you has nothing to teach you, it can still be a learning experience in that you can learn how better to deal with people who are difficult to deal with. And so there's always going to be people skills, professional skills. There's always going to be more to learn. And I think ultimately, if you take the attitude of dealing with these people is difficult, but I'm growing, I'm learning as a result of that, that might take the edge off it a little bit and make it just a little bit more manageable.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't always have to be learning a new skill. It could be learning about their perspective. Why do they have these concerns? What makes these concerns so strong for them? And just being able to understand what their perspective is and why they value things being done in such a specific way.
All right, well, I think that's where we're going to stop for today. But if you like our content, please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. We really appreciate it, and we really believe that spreading awareness and starting some of these discussions is important, especially now. And until next time, remember that even small steps can lead to big changes. We'll see you next time.